The old tractor rumbled along the riverbank as Henry Thompson did his morning rounds. For 40 years, he'd worked this farm alone, finding peace in its quiet routines. But this morning was different. Through the mist, he heard screams coming from the river. Without thinking, he jumped from his tractor and ran. There, in the rushing water, a woman was fighting for her life. Henry dove in, fighting the current, until he reached her. When he finally pulled her to shore, his heart stopped. Those eyes, he knew those eyes. It was Sarah Mitchell, his first love, who disappeared without a trace in 1973. She hadn't aged a day. Why did she vanish all those years ago? And why does she look exactly the same as the day she left? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Henry's hands trembled as he wrapped another blanket around Sarah's shoulders. She sat at his kitchen table, her wet hair dripping onto the worn wood, creating small pools that reminded him of the river itself. The morning sun streamed through the window, highlighting impossible truths. Her unlined face, those bright eyes that hadn't dimmed with time, even the way she held herself, exactly as she had in their youth. "You should be in your 70s, he said quietly, setting a mug of hot tea before her. The steam rose between them like the morning mist that still clung to the riverbank. "Just like me." Sarah's fingers went to her throat, touching the silver locket that had somehow survived her struggle in the water. It gleamed as if newly polished, though everything else she wore was soaked and mud-stained. "I know," she whispered. "I don't understand it either." Henry sank into the chair across from her, his joints protesting in a way that emphasized the stark contrast between them. While he had aged normally, his hair gone silver, his face marked by decades of sun and wind, she remained as she had been that summer evening in 1973 when she'd vanished without a trace. "The police searched for weeks," he said. "Your parents never gave up. They died still wondering what happened to you." He paused, studying her face for any sign of the decades that should have touched it. "Where have you been, Sarah?" She opened the locket with shaking fingers. Inside was a photograph he remembered well, the two of them at their high school graduation, young and full of dreams. The photo showed no signs of age or wear, as pristine as Sarah herself. "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "The last thing I remember clearly was walking by the river that night. You and I had argued about—" She frowned, struggling with the memory. "About me leaving for college while you stayed to help your father with his store," Henry finished. The pain of that last conversation had dulled over the years, but never truly faded. Sarah nodded slowly. "Everything after that is strange, like a dream that slips away when you try to hold on to it. There was light on the water and music." She shuddered. "Then I was in the river this morning, fighting to breathe." A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Through the screen, Henry could see Doc Miller's weathered face. The old physician had been Henry's friend for decades, one of the few people who'd helped him through the dark days after Sarah's disappearance. "Brought my bag like you asked, Henry," Doc called through the screen, "though your phone call made about as much sense as a rooster in a henhouse." He stepped inside, then stopped abruptly, his eyes widening as he took in Sarah's appearance. "Good Lord above." Henry watched as Doc examined Sarah, his professional demeanor slipping with each impossible discovery. Blood pressure, heart rate, reflexes, all suggested a woman in her early 20s. Even her eyes showed no signs of aging. "This is medically impossible," Doc finally said, putting away his stethoscope with hands that weren't quite steady. "You can't be the same Sarah Mitchell. You'd be 73 years old." "But she is," Henry said softly. "Ask her anything. About 1973, about our town, our friends, things only Sarah would know." And she did know, every detail of their shared past, every memory intact. But nothing beyond that night by the river, nearly 50 years, simply gone. The locket gleamed in the morning light, drawing Henry's eye again. Sarah had always worn it, a gift from her grandmother, who claimed it had old magic in it. They'd Laughed about that then, young and certain that magic belonged only in storybooks. Now, watching Sarah's young face in his sun-weathered kitchen, Henry wasn't so sure anymore. Something extraordinary had happened, something that defied every natural law. And somehow he knew the river held the answers. The same river that had taken her from him and now impossibly given her back. After Doc Miller left, promising discretion but clearly troubled, Henry climbed to the attic. The familiar smell of dust and old wood wrapped around him as he made his way to a trunk he hadn't opened in years. Inside, beneath layers of carefully preserved memories, he found what he was looking for, the 1973 Riverside High yearbook. His fingers traced the embossed cover before he opened it. There, on page 47, was Sarah's senior portrait. The same face that now sat in his kitchen, unchanged by time. Her smile held that slight quirk he'd always loved, the one that made it seem like she knew something others didn't. "I remember that photo day," Sarah's voice came from behind him. She'd followed him up, moving with the same quiet grace she'd had as a girl. "Mrs. Henderson kept fussing with my hair." Henry turned, holding the yearbook alongside her face. The resemblance wasn't just close, it was exact. "Tell me about that day," he said softly. "Tell me everything you remember." Sarah sat on an old chest, dust motes dancing around her in the attic's filtered light. "It was hot for September. You were wearing your father's red plaid shirt because you thought it made you look older." She smiled, the expression achingly familiar. "You were waiting outside the photography room, telling me jokes to make me laugh so my picture would look natural." "Why did the Scarecrow win an award?" Henry quoted, the memory rising unbidden. "Because he was outstanding in his field." They finished together, and for a moment the years between them seemed to dissolve. But then Sarah's smile faltered. "It's strange, Henry. I remember everything about our life then with perfect clarity. Every date, every conversation, every dream we shared. But after that night by the river..." She shook her head. "It's like trying to remember smoke." The yearbook lay open between them, its pages filled with faces that had aged, changed, and, in some cases, passed on. Tommy Parker, who'd become the town mayor, Alice Chen, who'd opened the pharmacy on Main Street. All of them had lived full lives, while Sarah remained frozen in time. "The whole town was searching for you," Henry said, turning to their senior superlatives page. "Most likely to stay together, Sarah Mitchell and Henry Thompson." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "Your father organized search parties. The police dragged the river. He swallowed hard. "I looked for you every day for months." "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, reaching for his weathered hand. The contrast between their skin was startling, his marked by decades of sun and work, hers as smooth as it had been in their youth. A flutter of paper caught their attention. A newspaper clipping had fallen from between the yearbook's pages. The headline read, "Local girl still missing after 3 months, no new leads." Henry remembered the day that article was published. He'd cut it out, hoping each new piece of information might somehow lead to finding her. The clipping was yellow with age, but Sarah's senior photo smiled up from it, eternally young, just like the woman sitting beside him. "The rumors started about 6 months after you disappeared," Henry said, his voice rough with memory. "Some said you'd run, away to the city. Others thought something darker had happened. But old Joe, who lived by the river, he had a different story." Sarah leaned forward, her locket catching the dim light. "What did he say?" "He claimed he saw lights on the water that night, said he heard singing that didn't sound quite human." Henry shook his head. "Everyone dismissed him as a drunk, but he was adamant, said the river had secrets older than the town itself." The floorboards creaked beneath them, and somewhere in the distance they could hear the river flowing, eternal and mysterious. Sarah's hand tightened on the yearbook. "I saw lights too," she whispered, "and heard music. I thought I dreamed it, but..." She touched her locket again, a gesture Henry was beginning to recognize as unconscious comfort-seeking. "Do you think old Joe is still alive?" "No," Henry said gently. He passed about 15 years ago. But his granddaughter Mary, she keeps his journals. She runs the local library now. Sarah stood, determination settling over her features. Then we need to talk to Mary, because right now, a drunk old man's stories about mysterious lights and river songs make more sense than anything else about my situation. Henry looked down at their senior portraits one last time before closing the yearbook. They had been so young, so certain about their future together. Now, here they were, separated by 50 years that only one of them had lived. "We'll figure this out," he promised, though he had no idea how. The yearbook felt heavy in his hands, weighted with memories and mysteries. "Whatever happened to you, we'll understand it." Sarah nodded, but her eyes were drawn to the small attic window that overlooked the river. The water gleamed in the afternoon sun, offering no answers to the questions that swirled between them like the current that had both separated and reunited them. As they descended from the attic, the yearbook tucked under Henry's arm, neither of them spoke of the impossible choice that lay ahead. If they did find answers, what then? Sarah was still 21, with her whole life ahead of her. Henry was 73, with most of his life behind him. The years between them yawned like the river itself, deep and unknowable. News travels fast in small towns, even when people try to keep it quiet. By late afternoon, Henry's driveway had become a parade of slow-driving cars, their occupants straining for a glimpse through his windows. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since Doc Miller left. "You should hear the theories at the diner," said Lisa, Henry's daughter, pacing his kitchen while Sarah rested upstairs. At 48, Lisa looked older than Sarah now, a fact that clearly unsettled her. "Some folks are saying it's a scam, that she's Sarah's daughter or granddaughter trying to claim the old Mitchell property." Henry pulled out a stack of newspapers from his bottom drawer. "Look at these," he said, spreading out the yellowed clippings. On the table, every article about Sarah's disappearance. The descriptions match exactly, down to the silver locket and the small scar on her left wrist from when she fell off Tommy Parker's horse. Lisa picked up one of the clippings, dated July 15th, 1973. "Massive search continues for missing local girl." The article detailed how Sarah had last been seen walking along the river path after closing her father's store. The photo showed her in her favorite blue dress, the same one she'd been wearing when Henry pulled her from the river this morning. "Dad," Lisa said gently, "you know this isn't possible, right? People don't just not age for 50 years. Before Henry could respond, his phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Stevens from the county hospital. "Henry, those blood samples. From your guest. We need to run them again. There must have been a contamination." "What did you find?" Henry asked, putting the call on speaker. "That's just it. According to these results, the cellular structure shows no signs of aging. It's like the samples came from someone in their early 20s. But the markers match the Mitchell family DNA we have on record, from when Sarah's mother had her surgery 5 years before she passed." Lisa's face paled as she listened. She sank into a chair, the newspaper clipping trembling in her hands. "There's something else," Dr. Stevens continued. "We found trace elements in her blood that I've never seen before, almost like, well, this will sound crazy, but almost like bioluminescent particles, similar to what we see in certain deep-sea creatures." A floorboard creaked, and they looked up to see Sarah standing in the doorway. She'd borrowed some of Lisa's clothes, though they hung loose on her younger frame. "The river glows sometimes," she said quietly, "at night, when the moon is right. It always has, but nobody ever believed me when I told them." Lisa stared at her, this woman who should have been her father's age but looked young enough to be her daughter. "I've lived here my whole life. I've never seen the river glow." "Not many people have," came a new voice. Mary Whitaker, old Joe's granddaughter, stood at the screen door, clutching a leather-bound journal. "Except those the river chose." Henry let her in, noting how she moved carefully around Sarah, like someone approaching a rare and possibly dangerous animal. Mary placed her grandfather's journal on the table next to the newspaper clippings. "I came as soon as I heard," she said, "because Grandpa Joe wrote about something like this. Not exactly the same, but similar." She opened the journal to a marked page. In 1923, a young man disappeared in the river. He showed up again in 1925, not a day older, with no memory of where he'd been. 3 days later, he vanished again, this time for good. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Outside, they could hear the river flowing, a sound so familiar they usually didn't notice it. Now it seemed to fill the room with its presence. "What happened to him?" Sarah asked, her hand going to her locket. Mary shook her head. "Grandpa's notes don't say, but he wrote something else, something he heard from his grandmother, who heard it from the native people who lived here before the town was built." She turned to another page. "They called this stretch of river the place where time bends. They said it was sacred and dangerous, and that sometimes it kept things that belonged to it." "Things?" Lisa asked sharply. "Or people?" "Both," Mary said, looking at Sarah. "They believed the river had its own consciousness, its own purpose, and sometimes, for reasons no one understood, it chose certain people to keep." Henry watched Sarah's face as she processed this. She looked so young, so vulnerable, yet her eyes held a depth that hadn't been there in 1973. Whatever had happened to her, wherever she'd been, it had left its mark in ways that weren't physical. "The blood tests," he said slowly, "the glowing particles, could they be from the river?" Dr. Stevens, still on the speakerphone, cleared his throat. "From a medical standpoint, none of this makes sense, but we're running more tests. The particles seem to be concentrated around her cellular membranes, almost like they're preserving them." Sarah suddenly swayed, catching herself on the doorframe. "I remember something," she said, her voice distant. "The night I disappeared, the water was glowing and there was singing, but not like human voices. And time felt like water too, flowing around me instead of through me." The newspaper. Clippings lay scattered on the table, 50 years of mystery captured in fading ink. Next to them, old Joe's journal hinted at answers that defied scientific explanation. And through the open windows, the river continued its eternal flow, keeping its secrets close. The next morning, Henry found Sarah by the river, staring into the water with an unsettling intensity. She held something in her hands, a mud-caked book, its pages warped, but somehow still intact. "I remembered where I hid it," she said without turning around. "The night I disappeared. I kept a journal that summer. I had this feeling, like something was coming, something big. I started hiding it under this rock by the bend." She looked up at him. 50 years under river mud, Henry. The pages should have dissolved, but look. She opened the journal carefully. The pages were stained with river water, but the ink remained clear, her youthful handwriting perfectly legible. The last entry was dated July 12, 1973. 3 days before she vanished. "Something's happening to me," Henry read aloud. "The river speaks now. Not in words exactly, but I understand it. Last night I saw lights under the water, like stars had fallen in. When I told Mom, she said I was working too hard at the store. But the lights are real, and the music, it's getting louder every night." Sarah shivered despite the warm morning. "I thought I was going crazy back then. Hearing things, seeing things, but I wasn't, was I?" Henry turned the pages, reading entries. From that final summer, Sarah had documented everything. The first time she saw the lights, June 2nd, the initial whispers of river song, June 15th, the growing sense that time moved differently near the water, June 28th. The girl in these pages was still his Sarah, but she was changing, being drawn into something ancient and mysterious. "July 10th, he read. "Had another fight with Henry about college. He doesn't understand why I can't leave. How can I explain that the river won't let me go? That's crazy, isn't it? A river can't make you do anything, but every time I think about leaving town, the music gets so loud I can barely think." Sarah touched the locket at her throat. "I remember writing that. I was sitting right here, terrified that I was losing my mind, but more terrified of leaving." A splash in the river made them both jump. Through the morning mist, something moved. Under the water's surface, something that seemed to glow faintly before disappearing into the deeper current. "There's more," Sarah said, taking the journal and flipping to the final entry. "Look at what I wrote the day before I disappeared." The page was dated July 14th, 1973. The handwriting was shaky, urgent. "The river showed me something last night. When the lights dance under the water, I can see other times, other versions of this place. I saw Native Americans in canoes, their faces painted for some ceremony. I saw the town being built. I saw things that haven't happened yet. Cars I don't. Recognize buildings that don't exist. The river knows everything that was and will be. It keeps time like we keep photographs, and sometimes it told me it keeps people too. The ones it needs, the ones who can hear its song. I'm scared, but I'm also ready. The music is so beautiful now. Tomorrow night is the full moon. The river says that's when." The entry ended abruptly there. "That's the last thing I wrote," Sarah said softly. "The next night I came down to the river. The lights were everywhere. And the song," she pressed her hands to her temples. "Why can't I remember what happened next?" Henry looked at the journal. "Then at Sarah, then at the river flowing endlessly past them. Maybe," he said slowly, "you're not supposed to remember. Maybe that's part of whatever the river did to you." A thought struck him. "Wait here," he said, and hurried back to his house. In his study, he found what he was looking for, his own journal from that summer. He'd kept it as part of his desperate attempt to find Sarah, documenting every detail that might help the search. When he returned, Sarah was trailing her fingers in the water, humming a melody he didn't recognize. The sight sent a chill down his spine. "I wrote about that night too," he said, opening his journal. July 15th, 1973. "The police say there's no sign of her anywhere along the river, but I know what I saw. I was driving home late, and I saw Sarah standing by the water. There was a strange light, like the moon was underwater instead of in the sky. I called out to her, but she didn't hear me. By the time I got down to the riverbank, she was gone. But the water, for a moment, it looked like there were stars floating in it, and I could have sworn I heard music." Sarah's eyes widened. "You saw it too. You never told me." She stopped, realizing the impossibility of that statement. Of course he'd never told her. She'd vanished that night. Henry sat beside her on the riverbank, his old bones protesting. "I thought I was crazy. With grief, imagining things. The police said the same thing, that stress was making me see things that weren't there. After a while, I almost believed them." Together, they looked out over the water. The morning sun made it sparkle innocently, giving no hint of its deeper mysteries. But now, they had proof in their hands. 2 journals, written 50 years apart, describing the same impossible things. "The river kept me," Sarah whispered. "But why, and why give me back now?" As if in answer, the water swirled strangely near their feet, and for just a moment, Henry could have sworn he saw lights dancing. In the depths, like stars that had found a new home in the current. Mary Whitaker returned that afternoon with a cloth-wrapped bundle. Her face was flushed with excitement as she laid it on Henry's kitchen table. "After you showed me Sarah's journal, I remembered something in Grandpa's attic," she said, carefully, unfolding the cloth. "He never let anyone touch these." Inside were 7 river stones, each about the size of a palm, each carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change if you looked at them too long. They were warm to the touch, despite having been wrapped up in Mary's car all morning. "My grandfather said these were ceremonial stones used by the Algonquin people who lived here centuries ago," Mary explained. "They used them in rituals by the river, especially during what they called the time of gathering waters, when the boundaries between times were thinnest." Sarah reached for one of the stones, then jerked her hand back. "They're humming," she said, "like the river's song, but concentrated." Henry couldn't hear anything, but he noticed how the stone nearest to Sarah seemed to glow faintly, responding. to her presence. "There's someone you need to meet," Mary said, watching the stone's reaction. "Elizabeth Redfeather. She's a tribal elder who still lives on the old reservation land upstream. If anyone knows the river's true nature, it's her." The drive to Elizabeth's home took them along the river's twisting course. Sarah pressed her face to the window, watching the water. Occasionally, she would gasp softly, pointing to things only she could see beneath the surface. Elizabeth's house sat on a bluff overlooking a bend in the river. Wind chimes made of river, stones and copper wire sang in the breeze. The old woman herself stood waiting on the porch, as if she'd known they were coming. "I felt the river's disturbance 2 days ago," she said without preamble, her dark eyes fixed on Sarah. "It has not released someone in a very long time." Inside, Elizabeth served them tea in cups made from river clay. The walls were lined with maps and drawings showing the river's course through time. Some showed places and structures Henry had never seen. "The river exists in all times at once," Elizabeth explained, tracing a pattern on one of Mary's stones. "What you see flowing past is only its surface in this moment. Beneath, it touches every era this land has known. Sometimes, when it finds someone who can hear its voice, it keeps them." "But why?" Sarah asked. "Why did it take me?" Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face. "The old stories say the river is a guardian of memory. It keeps those it needs to remember important times, important changes, like living. Photographs, preserved in its flow until they are needed." "Needed for what?" Henry asked. "That is for the river to know, and for its chosen to discover." Elizabeth picked up another stone, one marked with spiraling symbols. "But I will tell you this, the river does nothing without purpose. If it has returned you now, Sarah Mitchell, it is because this time needs you." Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky had been clear moments ago. Sarah's locket seemed to gleam brighter. "The stones are warming up," Mary said suddenly. Indeed, the carved rocks on Elizabeth's table had begun to glow faintly, their symbols more distinct. "It is time for truth," Elizabeth said. She laid the stones in a circle and began to chant in her native tongue. The stones' glow intensified, and Sarah gasped. "I can see," she whispered. "The river is showing me. Oh, Henry, I'm coming. Something that will change everything. The river kept me because—" She blinked, the vision fading. "It's gone, but it was important. Something about the old Mitchell land, and the river's course, and time itself." Elizabeth nodded. Gravely, "The river feels change approaching, big change. It has chosen you as its voice, its memory." She looked at Henry, "And you as its anchor to this time." The implications hung heavy in the air. Sarah, preserved from the past. Henry, rooted in the present. The river flowing between them, full of secrets and purpose. "My grandfather used to say," Mary added softly, "that love was the only force as powerful as the river itself. Maybe that's why it kept you, Sarah. Not just for what's coming, but because of what you and Henry share." Outside, the thunder grew closer, and the wind chimes sang louder, their music mixing with the river's eternal flow. The stones glowed brighter still, their symbols dancing like the lights Sarah had seen beneath the water so long ago. And in that moment, as lightning illuminated the river valley, Henry understood that their story, his and Sarah's, was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning again, wrapped in mysteries as deep as the river itself. Back at Henry's farm, the evening settled in with a soft purple dusk. Sarah sat in the living room, surrounded by boxes Henry had brought down from the attic. Each contained memories he'd never been able to let go. "You kept them all," she said, softly, holding a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, her letters to him from that final summer, each one filled with dreams, promises, and growing confusion about the river's call. "I kept everything," Henry admitted, easing into his armchair. "Couldn't bring myself to throw away a single note." He watched as she untied the ribbon with trembling fingers. "Dear Henry," she read aloud, "the fireflies are out tonight, dancing. by the river like the lights under the water. I wish you could see what I see. Sometimes I think the whole world is filled with magic we've forgotten how to notice." Her voice caught. This letter was dated just a week before she vanished. Henry pulled out another letter from his wallet, worn thin from decades of unfolding and refolding. "I carried this one with me every day," he said. "Your last letter to me." Sarah took it gently, recognizing her own handwriting. "Dearest Henry, something's changing. I can feel it in the air, in the river's song. I know you're worried about me, about the strange things I've been saying. But please understand, I'm not losing my mind. I'm finding something ancient and wonderful and terrifying. The river shows me such things, Henry. Times past and times to come, all flowing together like currents in a stream. I love you. I think I've loved you since we were children, skipping stones across the water. Whatever happens, please remember that. Always yours, Sarah." "I read this every day for years," Henry said quietly, hoping it would help me understand what happened to you. "The police thought it was evidence of mental instability, but I knew better. I knew you." Sarah reached into another box and pulled out a pressed corsage, dried roses still clinging to their ribbon. "Our senior prom," she said. "You were so nervous. Your hands were shaking when you pinned it on." "You were wearing blue," Henry remembered. "The same color as the river at twilight." Outside, a whippoorwill called, its lonely song mixing with the distant sound of flowing water. Sarah moved to sit closer to Henry, the letters scattered between them like fallen leaves. "I never stopped loving you," she confessed. "In the river's keeping, where time was like a dream, your face was the one clear thing I held on to. But now," she gestured at the years between them, visible in every line on Henry's face. "Now I'm an old man," he finished gently. "No," she touched his cheek. "Now you're the man who kept every letter, every memory, who never stopped believing in me, even when everyone else said to let go." From the box, she pulled out more memories. Ticket stubs from the drive-in theater, a small shell they'd found by the river, photographs of summer days that seemed both yesterday and a lifetime ago. "The river's changing again," Sarah said suddenly, her hand going to her locket. "I can feel it. Whatever it kept me for, whatever's coming. It's soon." Henry covered her hand with his. "Then we'll face it together this time." A sharp knock at the door startled them both. Lisa stood in the doorway, her face tense. "Dad, you need to see this." She held up the evening newspaper. The headline read, "Major development project threatens historic river valley. Mitchell property key to project success." Sarah's eyes widened. "The Mitchell property. My father's land. It's still in my name, isn't it? Since I never was declared." She couldn't finish the word dead. "Yes," Henry said. "All these years it's been held in trust. Your father never gave up hope you'd come back." The pieces began falling into place. The river's power, Sarah's return, the land that had been protected for 50 years. It all connected. "The river knew," Sarah whispered. "It kept me because it knew this would happen, that someone would try to change its course." Her voice grew stronger, "And it chose me to stop it." Henry looked at the letters scattered around them, each one a testament to a love that had survived 50 impossible years. Whatever was coming, they would face it with the strength of that love, and the power of the river that had both separated and reunited them. Elizabeth Redfeather arrived before dawn the next morning, carrying a leather tube that looked centuries old. Dark clouds gathered overhead, though no rain was forecast. "The river is restless," she said, as Henry let her in. "It knows they're coming." Sarah sat at the kitchen table, the newspaper spread before her. The development company, River Valley Enterprises, planned to redirect the river's course to accommodate a luxury resort complex. The Mitchell property was the key piece they needed. Elizabeth unrolled a hide map on the table, weighing its corners with Mary's carved stones. The map showed the river's course, but not as it appeared on modern charts. This version revealed something else. Points of power, places where the water's song grew strongest. "Your father's land," Elizabeth said to Sarah, pointing to a spot marked with spiraling symbols, "sits at the heart of the river's power. The oldest stories say it's where time flows thinnest, where the waters remember most clearly." The stones began to hum, a sound only Sarah could hear, but everyone could feel. Outside, the river's flow seemed to grow louder. "Look," Mary whispered, pointing to the map. Where the stones touched the hide, small points of light had begun to appear, like stars emerging at dusk. Sarah gasped. "It's the same light I saw in the river that night, the night it took me." Henry studied the map more closely. The glowing points formed a pattern, one that seemed familiar somehow. Then he realized it matched the arrangement of lights he'd seen on the water the night Sarah disappeared. "The development plans," Lisa said suddenly. She'd been quiet until now, watching with a scientist's skepticism. "They'll destroy these points of power." Elizabeth nodded gravely. "And with them, the river's ability to keep its memories, all that it has preserved, all that it knows of this land and its people, gone." Thunder rolled overhead as Sarah touched one of the glowing points on the map. Her locket flared with answering light, and for a moment, everyone in the room saw what she saw. The river, through time, carrying the memories of centuries like precious stones in its current. "That's why it kept me," Sarah said softly. "Not just to protect the land, but to remember, to be a living memory of what was, what is, and what could be lost." The map began to shift under their eyes. The glowing points pulsed like heartbeats, and the river's course seemed to move, showing other times, other paths it had taken through the ages. "There's more," Elizabeth said. "The river doesn't just hold memories, it holds time itself in balance here. Change its course, destroy its power points." "And what happens to time?" Henry asked, though he feared he knew the answer. "It fractures," Elizabeth replied. "The boundaries between then and now, already thin here, would break. The consequences." She shook her head. "The old stories speak of a time it happened before. An entire village lost, scattered across time like leaves in the wind." Sarah's hand found Henry's across the map. "We have to stop them, but how? They'll say we're crazy if we tell them the truth." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the kitchen with otherworldly light. The stones hummed louder, and the map's glow intensified. "Perhaps," Elizabeth said, "the river itself will show them the truth. But it needs all of us. The one it kept," she nodded to Sarah, "the one who remembered," she looked at Henry, "and those who carry the old knowledge." She touched the stones, their symbols now dancing within a light. "The development team arrives tomorrow," Lisa said, checking her phone. "They're meeting at the old Mitchell store to begin surveys." "Then we have until tomorrow," Sarah said, her voice stronger now, carrying an echo of the river's song, "to prepare for a fight that's been 50 years in the making." The map pulsed one final time, its light fading like sunset on water. But the knowledge it revealed remained. The river had chosen its time, chosen its protectors, and tomorrow would show them all why some forces of nature should never be changed. That evening, as sunset painted the river in shades of gold, Sarah walked along its banks alone. The water seemed to reach for her, small waves curling toward her feet like beckoning fingers. She found herself humming the river's song, a melody that lived somewhere between memory and dream. A glint caught her eye, something in the shallow water, catching the last rays of sun. She reached down, her fingers closing around a small circular object buried in the riverbed. Her heart stopped when she pulled it free of the mud. A gold ring, simple but elegant, with an inscription inside that time hadn't erased. "To Sarah, my forever love, July 20th, 1973. "I bought it 3 days after you disappeared," Henry's voice came from behind her. He stood at the top of the bank, leaning on a walking stick. "I was going to propose that weekend, had it all planned out. Dinner at Romano's, then a walk by the river at sunset." Sarah held the ring in her trembling palm. The river had kept it all these years, just like it had kept her. "You never married?" she asked softly. Henry made his way carefully down to her. "How could I?" The river had my heart, same as it had you. She showed him the ring, still perfect despite 50 years underwater. Like her, it had been preserved by whatever power flowed in these waters. The ceremony was going to be right here, Henry continued, gesturing to the riverbank. Under that old willow tree. You talked about it since we were kids. The willow still stood, its branches trailing in the water like memories given form. As they watched, lights began to dance beneath the surface, not just reflections, but the river's own luminescence. Look, Sarah whispered. The water was showing them something, ghostly images of what might have been. A young Henry in a suit, waiting under the willow. Sarah in a white dress, walking toward him. The future they should have had, preserved like a photograph in the river's flow. The river's trying to tell us something, Sarah said, her locket growing warm against her skin. About time, about choices. A sound drew their attention. Voices approaching through the gathering dusk. Lisa and Mary appeared, carrying Elizabeth's map and the carved stones. We found something, Mary said, excitedly. The map shows a pattern, a cycle. Every 50 years, the river's power peaks. That's when the boundaries between times are thinnest, when changes can be made or prevented. Lisa spread the map on a flat rock. The last peak was in 1973, she said, looking meaningfully at Sarah. The next one is tomorrow, Sarah. Finished, suddenly understanding. She held up the ring. The river didn't just keep me, it kept this too. Waiting for the right moment, the time when everything could change. Henry sat heavily on a fallen log. Change how? Elizabeth emerged from the shadows, as if the gathering darkness had produced her. The river offers a choice, she said. But choices have prices, always. The water swirled at their feet, its glow intensifying. Sarah felt knowledge flow into her mind like the river itself, understanding of what could be, what might be, what had to be. Tomorrow, when they come to survey the land, she said slowly, the river will be at its strongest. We can stop them, protect the water's course, but she looked at Henry, tears in her eyes. There's more. The river shows me a door, a way back. Back? Lisa asked, though they all knew what Sarah meant. To 1973, to the night I disappeared. I could choose differently, stay instead of being taken. She held up the ring. Have the life we were meant to have. The implications hung in the air like mist. Sarah returned to her own time, the past 50 years rewritten. A second chance at the life that had been stolen, but the river's song carried a warning tone now. Elizabeth touched one of the carved stones, its symbols glowing like brands. Such a change would not come without cost, she said. The river's power maintains the balance of time here. Use that power to change the past. And the future changes too, Mary finished. Everything that's happened since 1973, marriages, births, lives lived. My children, Lisa whispered. We wouldn't exist, would we, if you and Dad had married? Back then? Sarah clutched the ring tighter, feeling its weight, not just of gold, but of possibilities, of choices that could reshape time itself. The river lapped at the banks, its song now heavy with both promise and warning. Henry stood, taking her free hand in his weathered one. Together, they faced the water that had both divided and connected them across 50 impossible years. Tomorrow would bring the developers, and with them, a choice that would affect not just their lives, but the very flow of time in this valley. The ring gleamed in the growing darkness, and somewhere deep in the river's heart, ancient power gathered for what was to come. Dawn broke over the river in shades of pearl and gold. Elizabeth arrived carrying something wrapped in deerskin, a wooden totem, aged dark as river stones, carved with symbols that matched those on the ancient map. This belongs to the river, she said, placing it on Henry's kitchen table. It has been passed down through my family for generations, waiting for a time of great change. The totem was beautiful and unsettling, a spiraling column of carved figures that seemed to move. When viewed from different angles, At its heart, a channel ran from top to bottom like a river carved in wood. Water from a sacred spring flows through it during rituals, Elizabeth explained. It shows visions of possible futures, paths that might be taken. Sarah reached for it instinctively, then drew back as her locket pulsed with answering power. "It's alive," she whispered, "like the river itself." "Because it is the river," Elizabeth said. A piece of its consciousness, shaped by human hands, but filled with water's wisdom. They heard cars approaching, the development team arriving early. Henry peered out the window at a line of expensive vehicles pulling up to the old Mitchell. "Store!" "It's time," Sarah said, standing. She held the ring in one hand, her locket in the other. Both seemed to shimmer with inner light. Elizabeth poured spring water into the totem's channel. As it flowed, the carved figures began to glow, and the kitchen filled with a sound like distant singing. Suddenly, the room shifted around them. They saw visions in the flowing water, the valley as it had been, as it was, as it could be. They saw the developer's plan, concrete channeling the river, its sacred places buried under hotels and parking lots. The water's song turned discordant, pained. Then they saw another possibility. Sarah in 1973, choosing differently, staying with Henry. Their wedding under the willow tree. Children growing up along the river's banks. A lifetime lived in love. The song turned sweet, full of promise. But there was a third vision, one that made the totem pulse like a heartbeat. They saw Sarah, as she was now, standing before the developers, the river rising behind her with all its ancient power. They saw choices, consequences, changes that would ripple through time like stones dropped in still water. "They're waiting," Lisa said from the doorway. Through the window, they could see men in suits examining surveys and maps, planning to reshape the river valley. Sarah looked at Henry, then at the ring that should have been hers 50 years ago. The totem's song merged with the river's melody, offering clarity at last. "I understand now," she said softly, "why the river kept me, why it brought me back to this exact moment." She slipped the ring onto her finger, where it glowed like captured starlight. "Some things are more important than our own happiness." Henry took her hand, feeling the cool metal of the ring that symbolized both what was and what might have been. "Whatever you choose," he said, "remember that love doesn't need time to be real. 50 years or 50 minutes. What we have is true." The totem's glow intensified, and the air grew thick with possibility. Through the window, they could see the developers walking toward the river, their plans clutched in hands that had no understanding of what they meant to change. Sarah squared, her shoulders, the locket at her throat, pulsing in time with the totem's light. "Let's go," she said. "The river has waited 50 years for this moment. It's time to show them why some powers shouldn't be challenged." They stepped out into the morning light, the totem's song following them like a blessing. The river waited, its surface mirror-smooth despite the breeze, ready to reveal its true nature to those who thought it was nothing more than water, to be bent to human will. Robert Mitchell's pocket watch hadn't ticked in 50 years. Sarah's father had been wearing it the night she disappeared, and it had stopped at exactly 9:47 p.m., the moment the river took her. Now she held it in her palm as she faced the development team, feeling its weight like destiny. "Miss Mitchell," the lead developer said, consulting his papers with a frown. "According to our records, Sarah Mitchell would be 73 years old." "She is who she says she is," Henry said, standing beside her, "and she owns this land." The development team had spread their plans across folding tables by the river's edge. The morning sun caught the water behind them, making it shimmer unnaturally. "The property has been in legal limbo for decades," another developer said. "We have documentation showing—" The watch in Sarah's hand suddenly grew warm. She opened it, and for the first time in 50 years, its hands began to move. Not forward, but backward, spinning counterclockwise with increasing speed. The river's surface began to ripple without wind. Elizabeth's totem, which they'd brought with them, started to hum. What you're planning, Sarah said, her voice carrying an echo of the river's song, would destroy something ancient and powerful, something that protects this valley, this town, time itself. The developers exchanged skeptical looks, but their expressions changed as the watch's hands spun faster and the air around them began to shimmer like heat waves. The river remembers, Sarah continued, holding up the watch. It remembers everything. Let me show you. The watch face glowed, and suddenly they weren't standing on the riverbank in 2025. They were seeing the valley through time, Native American ceremonies by these waters, settlers building the first bridge, Sarah's own disappearance in 1973. The developers staggered as reality shifted around them. Impossible, the lead developer whispered, but he couldn't deny what he was seeing. The watch burned brighter, and Sarah felt power flowing through her. Not just the rivers, but time's itself. She could feel every moment the river had preserved, every memory it had kept safe. You see, she said, the river isn't just water. It's a guardian, a keeper of time, and it chose me to protect it. The developers backed away as the water began to glow, lights dancing beneath its surface, like the night Sarah disappeared. Her locket pulsed in harmony with her father's watch, and the totem's song grew louder. Then something extraordinary happened. The watch's hands aligned at 9:47, and time itself seemed to hold its breath. Sarah saw two paths stretching before her, with perfect clarity. She could use this moment, this convergence of power, to return to 1973. Take the life she should have had with Henry, the years that had been stolen. The watch offered that possibility, its hands ready to turn back time itself. Or she could stay, use this power to show these men the truth, protect the river not just for now, but for all time to come. But that choice meant accepting the years lost, the life unlived. Henry's hand found hers, warm and real, despite the temporal energies swirling around them. Whatever you choose, he whispered, we face it together. Sarah looked at the watch, then at the river that had kept her safe for 50 years. She understood at last. Some loves transcend time itself, and some purposes are greater than personal happiness. The watch grew brighter still, and Sarah made her choice. The moment of decision had come, carried on the river's song and the turning of time's wheel, as the valley itself waited to see what path its chosen guardian would take. Sarah raised the watch high, its golden surface catching the morning light. I choose now, she declared. I choose this time, this moment, this purpose. The watch's hands stopped their wild spinning and began to tick forward normally for the first time in 50 years. The river answered with a surge of power that sent the developers stumbling backward. Mary stepped forward, holding what looked like a piece of clouded glass she'd found at the river's edge. But as she raised it, the glass cleared, becoming a window through time itself. In its depths, they all saw what Sarah's choice meant. Images flickered across the glass surface. The river flowing free and powerful, its sacred sites preserved, its magic protected. They saw future generations walking these banks, guided by the wisdom Sarah would share. They saw the valley growing, not into a concrete resort, but into a protected sanctuary where time and nature danced in eternal balance. You see, Sarah said to the astonished developers, the river shows us what can be, what must be. The lead developer, Mr. Richardson, stared at the glass in Mary's hands. In its reflection, he saw himself as a child, playing by this same river, feeling its magic without understanding it. The memory stirred something long forgotten. My grandmother, he said slowly, used to tell stories about the river's lights, about people it had taken and returned. I never believed her. The river glass shifted again, showing them glimpses of other lives touched by the water's power. Elizabeth's ancestors performing sacred ceremonies, old Joe witnessing the lights, Henry keeping faith through 50 years of waiting. Each image rippled into the next like water flowing over stones. The development plans, Richardson said, looking at the papers scattered on the folding table. They never felt right. But the pressure from the board, he straightened his shoulders. "No, this ends here." His colleagues began to protest, but fell silent as the river glass showed them one final vision: the catastrophe that would follow if they changed the river's course. The fractured timelines, the torn fabric of reality, the price of disrupting. Powers older than human memory. Sarah felt the watch grow cool in her hand as the river's power settled into a new pattern around them. She had chosen the harder path, living in a time not her own, carrying the river's wisdom forward instead of reclaiming her lost years. But looking at Henry beside her, she knew it was right. "The Mitchell property," Richardson said, gathering up the development plans, "will be placed under environmental protection permanently." He managed a shaky smile. "My grandmother would have wanted that." The other developers nodded, their faces showing the same mix of awe and understanding. They had come expecting a simple business negotiation. They were leaving with a glimpse of powers beyond their imagining. As the development team departed, Mary held up the river glass one last time. Its surface showed something new. Sarah and Henry together, aged but happy, surrounded by people learning the river's wisdom. Not the life they had planned in 1973, but one equally filled with love and purpose. "The river gives what we need," Elizabeth said softly, "not always what we think we want." Henry took Sarah's hand, feeling the wedding ring that now symbolized not what might have been, but what would be. "We have time now," he said, "different than we planned, but ours." The river glass gradually clouded over, returning to its seemingly ordinary state. But like Sarah herself, it had been transformed by its time in the river, becoming a lens through which truth could be seen. The watch ticked steadily in Sarah's palm, marking not lost time now, but moments newly given. The river flowed behind them, its song gentler but still full of power and promise. They had chosen preservation over restoration, protection over personal happiness, and in that choice they had found a different kind of joy, one as deep and enduring as the river itself. Word spread through the town like ripples on water. Within days, the story of Sarah's return and the developers' retreat had transformed from gossip to legend. But it was Elizabeth's announcement that drew them all to the river at dawn one week later. "There is a spring," she told the gathered crowd, holding up a crystal vessel of water that seemed to glow from within. "Sacred to my people, hidden for generations. Its waters flow through the veins of this land, giving the river its power. Today, we share its wisdom." The morning mist parted as Elizabeth moved among them, allowing each person to take a single sip from the vessel. As they drank, their eyes widened. The water showed them visions, personal glimpses of the river's truth. Lisa saw her children's children playing on these banks, learning the old ways alongside the new. Mary witnessed her grandfather's encounters with the river's magic, understanding at last what he had tried to tell her. Even the skeptics found their doubts washed away by the spring's clear truth. "The water remembers," Sarah explained, standing beside Henry at the river's edge. "It carries the memories of all who have lived here, all who have loved these banks and understood their power." She wore her father's watch on a chain now, next to her locket. Both caught the morning light as she spoke, reminding everyone of the extraordinary choice she had made, the choice to stay, to teach, to protect. "But how?" someone called out. "How do we keep this magic alive?" Sarah smiled and gestured to the river. Under the surface, lights began to dance, not just for her now, but visible to all who had tasted the spring's water. The veil between ordinary sight and river sight had been thinned by the sacred water's touch. "We learn," she said simply, "we remember, we pass it on." Henry stepped forward, his weathered hand finding Sarah's. "This valley has always been special," he said. "Some of us felt it but didn't understand. Now we can see it clearly." The gathered townspeople murmured in agreement. Many of them had lived here all their lives, sensing something extraordinary about their home, but never knowing quite what it was. The spring water had given them clarity, showing them the river's true nature and their own connection to it. Elizabeth, poured the remaining spring water into the river in a glittering arc. Where it met the larger flow, circles of light spread outward, and the air filled with that otherworldly music Sarah had first heard 50 years ago. "The river accepts our understanding," Elizabeth said, "and offers its partnership." As if in response, the water near the bank began to shift and change. Small whirlpools formed, each containing an image. Native American ceremonies, colonial settlements, modern lives, all the history the river had witnessed and preserved. Mary stepped to the water's edge, holding the river glass. In its depths, she saw new possibilities forming. A center for learning the old ways, guides trained in river wisdom, the town becoming a sanctuary for those seeking to understand time's deeper currents. "We'll need teachers," she said, looking at Sarah and Elizabeth. "And protectors," Henry added, thinking of the developers who might yet come. Sarah touched her locket, feeling the river's power pulse through it. "We'll be both," she said, "all of us together." The spring water's effect rippled through the community in the days that followed. People began to notice things they'd overlooked before, the way the river changed color with its moods, the patterns in its flow that predicted weather and seasons, the spots where time ran differently along its banks. Children started spending more time by the water, naturally attuned to its magic. They collected river stones with strange markings, reported conversations with what they called the river's voice, and showed an innate understanding of its patterns. The old-timers, too, found their long-held beliefs validated. Stories they'd been afraid to share, experiences they'd thought they'd imagined, all were brought into the light of common understanding. And at the heart of it all were Sarah and Henry, their love story becoming part of the river's legend. They had chosen duty over personal happiness, only to find that the two were not so different after all. Their commitment to the river had given them a different kind of happily ever after, one that would ripple through time like the sacred spring water itself, touching lives for generations to come. Mary burst into Henry's kitchen one morning, clutching what looked like a newspaper, but the masthead read, "River Valley Chronicle, September 15th, 2035, 10 years in the future." "The river glass showed me where to find it," she explained breathlessly. "Under the old willow tree, it's what will be, what we're building toward." Sarah and Henry leaned over the paper together, their fingers intertwining as they read. The front page showed their town transformed. "River Valley Sanctuary celebrates. Decade of magic and memory." The accompanying photograph showed the old Mitchell property, now home to the River Wisdom Center. Children gathered around an aged but vibrant Sarah as she taught them to read the water's patterns. Henry stood nearby, his face deeply lined but happy, helping young ones skip stones across the enchanted surface. "Keep reading," Mary urged, her eyes bright with excitement. The article detailed how the town had become a beacon for those seeking to understand the deeper mysteries of time and nature. The river's power, once hidden, was now openly acknowledged and studied. Scientists came to measure its anomalies, mystics to learn its wisdom, and ordinary people to experience its magic. Representative Lisa Thompson, the article read, daughter of local legends Henry Thompson and Sarah Mitchell, has successfully pushed through legislation protecting similar sites across the country. "What we discovered here," she says, "is just the beginning. There are other places where time and nature dance together, waiting to be understood and preserved." Sarah's hand went to her locket as she read about herself. The woman time forgot, as she was once known, has become the woman who remembers, teaching new generations the river's songs, its stories, its power to heal and transform. The newspaper contained other glimpses of the future, Mary becoming the sanctuary's head researcher, Elizabeth's teachings being incorporated into university studies, the town growing not through development, but through appreciation of its natural magic. But it was the small article on the back page that brought tears to their eyes. Local couple celebrates unusual anniversary. Time is no barrier to true love. says Henry Thompson, marking 60 years since he first fell in love with Sarah Mitchell, though they've only been married for 10 of them. Henry's weathered hand tightened around Sarah's. "So we do find our way," he said softly. The newspaper began to fade like morning mist, its purpose fulfilled, but its message remained. Their choice to protect the river had not just preserved the past, it had created a future more extraordinary than any developer's dreams. Through the window, they could see new visitors arriving at the river's edge, drawn by stories of its power. The water sparkled with welcome, its ancient wisdom finally ready to be shared with those who could understand and protect it. "The future knows us," Sarah whispered, touching the newspaper one last time before it dissolved completely. "And remembers us well." The night of the autumn equinox brought a strange stillness to the valley. The river ran quiet, almost expectant, its surface like black glass beneath a full moon. Elizabeth had gathered them all, Sarah, Henry, Lisa, Mary, and a select few others who had proven themselves true friends of the river. "It's time," Elizabeth said, unwrapping a stone that pulsed with its own inner light. The river's heartstone shows itself once in a generation when the waters run deepest with power. The stone was neither large nor small, shaped by centuries of water into a perfect oval. Within its crystalline depths, lights danced like those beneath the river's surface. It seemed to sing softly, a harmony to the river's eternal song. "The stone is the river's essence," Elizabeth explained, "a piece of its consciousness made manifest. Tonight, it will help us complete what Sarah's return began." They formed a circle at the river's edge, the heartstone placed on a bed of river moss at its center. Sarah's locket and Henry's watch began to pulse in time with the stone's glow. "Join hands," Elizabeth instructed. "The river wants to share its deepest magic." As their circle closed, the stone's light intensified. The river's surface began to move, not with waves or current, but with memories made liquid. They saw themselves as the river saw them, beings of light and time, their lives like tributaries flowing into the greater stream of existence. Sarah gasped as understanding flooded through her. "We're part of it," she whispered. "All of us, always have been." The heartstone's glow spread outward, touching each person in the circle. Where its light fell, it revealed the river's mark. On their souls, Henry's decades of faithful waiting, Lisa's inherited connection to the water's magic, Mary's destiny as a keeper of its law. But it was when the light reached Sarah that the true magic began. Her locket opened of its own accord, releasing a cascade of river light. The years she had spent in the river's keeping became visible, not as empty time, but as a gathering of wisdom, a preparation for this moment. "The river wasn't just preserving you," Elizabeth said in awe. "It was teaching you. Everything it knows, everything it is, you carry it now." The heartstone pulsed brighter, and the river itself began to rise, not in flood but in celebration. Water took shape around them, arches of living light, cascades of memory, pools of time made visible. Through it all, Henry held Sarah's hand, his grip firm and sure. The stone showed them something else then, their love as the river saw it, a force as natural and powerful as its own flow, transcending the very time it had mastered. "Now," Elizabeth said, her voice carrying the water's song, "we complete the circle." Sarah stepped forward, drawn by an understanding deeper than thought. She lifted the heartstone, felt its warmth pulse against her palms. "The river kept me, so I could keep it," she said. "Not just its power, but its purpose. The developers weren't the only threat it foresaw. The world is changing, and the old magics need new guardians." She held the stone high, and every drop of water in the valley seemed to sing. The river rose around them in a gentle dome of light and liquid, showing them visions of what would come. Children learning the water's wisdom, the valley becoming a sanctuary of natural magic, the river's power protected and shared with those worthy to understand it. The Heartstone's light reached its peak, and for a moment they all saw as the river saw, felt as it felt, understood as it understood. They were part of its flow now, each in their own way, protectors, teachers, students of its ancient ways. When the light finally faded, the Heartstone had changed. What had been crystal was now river glass, forever reflecting the magic they had witnessed. And in its depths, their own faces looked back at them, transformed by understanding, marked by the river's eternal wisdom. The circle was complete. The river's power was no longer hidden but shared, no longer solitary but supported by those who would carry its memory forward. And at its heart stood Sarah and Henry, their love proving that some forces, like the river itself, could transcend time's boundaries and emerge stronger for the journey. The discovery came on a misty morning when Sarah was teaching a group of children by the river. One of them, a girl with bright eyes and an old soul, had brought a camera, not digital, but an ancient Polaroid that had belonged to her grandmother. "The river wants its picture taken," the girl announced, with the certainty of the young. Before anyone could respond, she'd snapped the shutter. The photograph that emerged was unlike any they'd ever seen. As the image developed, it kept changing, showing not one moment but many, all existing simultaneously in the same frame. Sarah called for Henry and Elizabeth immediately. They gathered in the newly established River Wisdom Center, placing the strange photograph on a table made from river driftwood. "A quantum photograph," Elizabeth breathed, watching the image shift. "The river is showing us all its possibilities." At once, in the photograph's depths, they saw multiple versions of their story playing out. Sarah and Henry's wedding in 1973, their life that might have been. Sarah remaining in the river's keeping forever. The developers succeeding in their plans, the valley transformed into concrete and steel, and their current reality, the path they'd chosen, with its unexpected joys and deeper purpose. But something else was happening. The different timelines in the photograph began to weave together, merging into a new pattern that encompassed all possibilities while transcending them. "The river isn't just showing us what might have been," Sarah said, her locket pulsing with recognition. "It's showing us how all paths lead to this moment, this choice." Henry leaned closer, his eyes catching a particular image as it surfaced. Himself as a young man, standing by the river, the night Sarah disappeared, but now they could see what he hadn't then. The lights beneath the water, the shimmer of time bending, the river's conscious choice. It was always going to be this way, he realized. Every version of us, every possible path, they all served the river's purpose. The photograph shifted again, showing them gathered around this very table, looking at this very image. The recursive vision sparked something in Sarah's memory. "The river exists in all times at once," she said, quoting Elizabeth's words from what felt like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. "What we see is only its surface." As if responding to her understanding, the photograph began to glow with the same light they'd seen in the Heartstone. The images merged and separated, showing them how every choice, every moment had been both free and fated, personal and universal. They saw Sarah's time in the river not as an absence, but as a gathering, a collecting of wisdom from all possible timelines. They saw Henry's years of waiting not as loss, but as preparation, building the strength needed for what was to come. Mary arrived, drawn by the photograph's power, the river glass in her hands, resonating with its energy. "Look," she said, holding the glass beside the photograph. "They're showing the same truth." In both artifacts, they could see the future unfolding, the River Wisdom Center growing, its influence spreading like ripples in still water. But more than that, they saw how their story had become part of the river's own story, woven into its eternal flow. Lisa joined them, bringing the ancestral stones Elizabeth had once shown them. The carved symbols seemed to dance in response to the photograph's shifting images. "All paths lead to now," Elizabeth said softly. "All choices bring us here." The photograph flared once more, showing them a final vision, the river valley as it would be, could be, should be, a place where time and love and magic flowed together, where the boundaries between past and present dissolved like morning mist over water. When the image finally settled, it showed them all as they were in that moment, changed by time and choice, but exactly where they needed to be. The photograph had become both mirror and window, reflecting their journey while showing them the way forward. Sarah took Henry's hand, feeling the years between them not as a barrier but as a bridge. "Every version of us found our way here," she said. "Every possible path led to this." The photograph now hung in the center's main hall, still shifting, subtly for those who knew how to look. It reminded them that time, like the river, held many currents, but love, like water, would always find its way home. On the eve of their wedding, 50 years delayed but perfectly timed, Elizabeth brought them a gift unlike any other. The eternal flame lantern, as she called it, was an ancient thing of copper and river glass. Its light, neither flame nor electricity, but pure river magic captured in form. "It has been waiting," she said, placing it in their hands, "like you waited for each other." The lantern's light pulsed gently, the same blue-white radiance they'd seen beneath the river's surface. Within its glass panels, images formed and dissolved. Every moment Sarah and Henry had shared, both in their youth and now, woven together like strands of light. "Tomorrow you'll be married under the willow tree," Elizabeth continued, "just as you once planned. But first, the river asks for a ceremony of its own." As darkness fell, they gathered by the water's edge, Sarah, Henry, and their closest circle. The lantern's light seemed to call to the river, and soon answering lights rose from the depths, dancing like fireflies beneath the surface. "The river marks its own marriages," Elizabeth explained, taking the lantern and setting it on the water. Instead of sinking, it floated, its light spreading across the surface in expanding rings. Between its chosen ones, between past and present, between memory and possibility. Sarah's locket and Henry's watch began to glow in harmony with the lantern. The river's song rose around them, clear and sweet as that first night 50 years ago when it had claimed Sarah for its own. "Now we understand," Sarah said softly. "The river didn't separate us. It was preparing us for this, a love that could bridge time itself." Henry took her hand, his weathered fingers entwining with her eternally young ones. "Every moment led us here," he agreed, "even the ones that seemed lost." The lantern's light grew stronger, and within its glow they saw themselves as the river. Saw them, two souls whose love had become part of its flow, whose story had strengthened its magic, whose choices had protected its future. Elizabeth began to sing in her native tongue, a song old as the river itself. Mary and Lisa joined in, their voices carrying the weight of generations. The lantern spun slowly on the water, its light touching each person in turn, showing them their part in this greater story. They saw Lisa, whose very existence proved that love could transcend time's boundaries. Mary, whose dedication to river lore would guide future generations. The children who would learn the water's wisdom, ensuring its magic would never again be forgotten or denied. When the lantern's light reached Sarah and Henry, it blazed like sunrise on water. Their entire story played out within its glow. Young love, tragic separation, faithful waiting, impossible return, and finally, triumphant reunion. But more than that, it showed them what their love had created, a new way of seeing time itself, a bridge between what was and what could be. "The river gives its blessing," Elizabeth announced as the lantern floated back to shore. Its light had become permanent now, a testament to promises kept and love preserved. Tomorrow they would speak formal vows beneath the willow tree, surrounded by family and friends. But here, witnessed by the river that had shaped their destiny, they made deeper promises, to be guardians of its wisdom, teachers of its magic, protectors of its power. The lantern would hang in their window, its light a beacon for all who sought to understand the river's truth. Like their love, it would burn eternal, a reminder that some forces transcend time's normal flow. As night deepened around them, the river's lights matched the lantern's glow, star for star. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter in their story, but this moment, this perfect convergence of past, present and future, would live forever in the river's memory and in their hearts. Dawn broke over the river valley, painting the water in shades of pearl and gold. Sarah stood at the window of their home, the eternal flame lantern casting its steady glow beside her. Something new had appeared overnight. Morning glory flowers, blooming out of season, their blue petals spiraling up the porch rails like rivers made of silk. The river's wedding gift, Henry said, joining her at the window. His face, lined with years she hadn't lived, held more joy than she'd ever seen. The flowers weren't just blue. They held the same otherworldly shimmer as the river's depths, each petal reflecting tiny points of light, like stars caught in morning dew. They formed a natural archway leading down to the water's edge, where the willow tree waited for their long-delayed ceremony. Already people were gathering, Lisa helping Elizabeth arrange the carved stones in a circle, Mary setting up the River Wisdom Center's first formal documentation of a river-blessed union. Children ran between the morning glories, their laughter mixing with the water's song. "Ready?" Henry asked, offering his arm. Sarah touched her locket, then his watch, feeling the river's power pulse through both. "I've been ready for 50 years, she smiled. As they walked down the flower-lined path, the morning glories turned to follow them, like tiny waves breaking toward shore. The river itself seemed to hold its breath, its surface mirror-smooth despite the breeze. They spoke their vows beneath. The willow tree, its branches swaying with memories of another time, another almost wedding. But this ceremony, witnessed by both people and river, carried the weight of all they'd learned, all they'd become. When they kissed, the morning glories burst into light like dozens of tiny lanterns, and the river's surface erupted in answering starbursts of joy. Their love story, impossible by any normal measure of time, had become part of the river's eternal flow. And so the story ended where it began, by the river that had both separated and united them, under a sky that had watched 50 years pass in the blink of an eye, surrounded by the magic they had helped preserve. But like the river itself, this ending was really just another beginning. For as long as water flows and time bends and love transcends both, their story will be told here in the valley, where a young woman once vanished into river light and returned to teach us all that some loves are worth waiting any amount of time for. The morning glories bloomed until winter, then seeded themselves along the riverbank, a permanent reminder that magic, like love, could flower even in the most impossible seasons.